Our next speaker is co-speakers by Peter Derrick and Patrizia Nobbe. Peter Derrick is retired from the MTA and has authored a book on tunneling into the future. He is presently co-authoring a book with Patrizia on the 2nd Avenue subway. Patrizia did her PhD here at CUNY on infrastructure decisions with a major focus on the 2nd Avenue subway. So I'd like to introduce Peter Derrick to begin the presentation on the 2nd Avenue subway.
Okay, all right, that's great. I'm going to put your thing down. Okay, I'm going to cover the history of the 2nd Avenue subway up to 1980, and Patrizia is going to talk about the subway after that. And the pictures seem to have disappeared, so maybe because I closed the thing.
Go ahead and speak. I'll get the laptop going.
Okay. Anyway, the 2nd Avenue subway was actually first proposed around 1920 with the idea of replacing the two elevated railroad lines that were on 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue in Manhattan. It was part of the second stage of the independent subway system in 1929. The first stage of the independent subway system was planned in 1924 and included the 6th and 8th Avenue subways and the Queens Boulevard line and a number of other lines. All of the first stage of the independent system was constructed, but none of the second stage was constructed in the 1930s. So after World War II, the city and the Board of Transportation, which in 1953 became the New York City Transit Authority, focused again on the 2nd Avenue subway, and there was a 1951 bond issue for $500 million, which people thought was going to fund the 2nd Avenue subway, but the Transit Authority, when it came into being in 1953, decided to spend that money instead on fixing up the existing capital plant of the subway system, which is really the first time that there was this trade-off that had to be made between spending capital money on upgrading the existing system, replacing subway cars and buses and track and signals, etc., as opposed to building new lines. And ever since the 50s, there's been this problem of getting money to do both. MTA right now needs about $4 billion every 5 years just to upgrade the subway system, and building something like the 2nd Avenue subway, which the first stage of which, just the 3 stations from 72nd to 96th Street, is costing $4.5 billion, is a big chunk of money on top of that. And so that trade-off that started in the 50s, when 2nd Avenue subway wasn't built, then along came Nelson Rockefeller and his chief transportation guy, William Ronan, who was the first chairman of what he created, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which came into being in 1968. Ronan had a massive transportation improvement plan, which included, once again, the 2nd Avenue subway. And he actually started to build, in the 1970s, state pieces of the 2nd Avenue subway, which I think some of these photographs, those photographs I think are the current construction. Some of the previous photographs are earlier construction, I believe. I didn't supply these photos, so I'm not exactly sure what they are, but they're all of the 2nd Avenue subway. But as I said, there was construction done in the 1970s north of 96th Street and a small piece near the Manhattan Bridge. And then that construction was stopped in the 70s. And then in 1980, Richard Ravitch was chairman of the MTA, and he made a conscious decision that since the existing subway system, as well as the bus system and the commuter rail system under the control of MTA, that is to say Metro North and the Long Island Railroad, because they were in such bad shape, all of the capital funds that were available to MTA were going to be used on fixing up the existing system. And since that first program that Ravage put together for 82 to 86, over $110 billion has been spent, in fact, on fixing up the existing system. Anyway, so what you've had basically since the 1950s is a trade-off between fixing up the existing system. In the 90s, as Patricia will talk about, when the MTA had already spent billions of dollars from 1982 to 1991 upgrading the existing system, MTA began once again to look at what should be done about the Second Avenue subway. David Gunn, who was president of the New York City Transit Authority, asked his staff, what should we do? And that led to a study that Patricia will talk about. That's basically all I want to say. I'd like to leave plenty of time for questions, so I think Patricia should pick up around 1980, 1990 as to what went on since then, including construction of the subway. So why don't you come up and do that?
Thank you, Peter, for outlining the long-term history of the Second Avenue subway. Investment decision processes are always complicated, even more so in complex metropolitan areas. And the Second Avenue subway construction, as any mega project, is in some ways a surprising achievement. And in my brief presentation, I want to outline the three main factors that actually led to the current construction. How did it happen that the subway, which was in planning or in talks since 1929, is happening now? So the start of construction of the first four phases of the subway, the one between 96th Street and 63rd Streets, I assume you're knowledgeable about this. The planned completion date is December 2016. There are three main factors. The first one is, I want to call it MTA's determination to build that subway. So since the 1980s, Peter mentioned it, the MTA under Chairman Richard Ravage had been busy fixing up their existing network, and this took all the capacities they had, and there was no way of thinking about real capital expansion. But towards the end of the 80s, the subway system was back in reasonably good shape, and then planners within the Transit Authority, subdivision of the MTA, started thinking about the Second Avenue subway again. They put it back on the agenda and commissioned and conducted a variety of studies, plan studies, to see whether it's feasible, how it's doable. And although it sounds self-evident, but the project sponsor somehow needs to be behind their project, which is factor one. So as the project rose up through the ranks of the planning staff in the Transit Authority, the agreement of the MTA chairman was not necessarily a given. The MTA is a New York State agency with their chairman appointed by the state governor, and so the state has a lot to say about transportation decisions in the city. And not all governors and MTA chairmen historically were strong supporters of the Second Avenue subway. However, in this case, the then chairman of the MTA, Peter Calico, backed the subway, the Second Avenue subway, against the wishes of the governor that actually appointed him. So the first success factor is that the subway got on the eternal MTA agenda, it got approved all the way up to the MTA chairman, and then subsequently on the decision board, which submitted the project as part of the expenses of the 2000-2004 capital program. And now money and outside support or support of the subway, political support, still had to fall in place. So the second big factor is money. And we all know that infrastructure investment, particularly tunnel projects in urban areas, are very costly. Second Avenue subway price tag for the first stage will come in at $4.5 billion for the first phase. The MTA did not have that money readily available, but funded the project over the course of two capital programs, supported by a mixture of federal and bond funding. In 2008, the project attracted a $1.3 billion federal New Starts grant, with the project, with the Second Avenue subway, being ranked first among all other infrastructure projects competing for such funds. And after some major political and PR efforts, a 2005 bond issue also covered the remainder of the funds for the first phase, or significantly contributed to funding it. So, in far as it is possible to distinguish money and politics, the third factor that contributed to project success was smart politics and coalition formation. In some ways, the Second Avenue subway successfully gathered a crowd of outside supporters as well. So, in those terms, there were two important things going on. First, the vote trading on the capital program review, and second, the outside support provided by a powerful civic group. So first, the MTA decides over their capital expenditures in 5-year increments. Every 5 years, the upcoming expenditures must be approved by a capital program review board, which features, in addition to the MTA chairman and the governor, state decision makers from both sides of the aisle in the legislative, and depending on the project, New York City representatives as well. The board will have to approve the proposed capital budget unanimously, and that's where the politics come in. There were and still are several frontiers in the discussions leading up to the capital program review board decisions. The head of the MTA, appointee of the state governor, has to be on board with their project being on the agenda. And then the upper and lower houses in the state legislature, or their respective speakers, also have to approve of that project and of any given project on the capital program. And in New York State, that means negotiating through a rift between car-driving upstate New Yorkers and subway-taking city New Yorkers, and through the often related rift between Republicans and Democrats. Finally, New York City Mayor had to approve has to approve too. And naturally, there was a lot of contention and discussion over several items on the capital programs, and all of these items would cost money. And for both relevant capital programs for the Second Avenue subway, New York State Assembly Speaker Shelley Silver, one of the capital program review board members, fought very hard for the Second Avenue subway and made his approval dependent on the Second Avenue subway being actually on that program to be approved. East Side Access, another large tunnel project suggested for the capital plan, on the same capital plan, but with a very different set of political supporters, became important here as well. Silver would only approve the capital program and hence East Side Access if the Second Avenue subway was on that program in full length. Full length means the 4 planned parts of the subway, even though it's not really sure when the other parts will get implemented. Shelley Silver's hope, as a representative of the Lower East Side, was that it would get extended. The subway will one day get extended down all the way down to his district. So, though the approvals were achieved, but funding is still. So this way the approval was achieved. So the other reason, funding was still not complete yet. And the other reason the project succeeded was because of the outside support, as I said. A broad alliance of New York-based civic business groups, regional planning, real estate and environmental groups, the Empire State Transportation Alliance, helped raise awareness of the importance of the project by increasing its visibility, and particularly that alliance also promoted the project for the 2005 Bond Issue Act successfully. The act was approved by New York State voters at a 10% margin, and that money was really crucial for the Second Avenue subway to happen as well. So approval and funding were achieved for the first phase, and presently the second stage of the subway is on the 2015-2019 capital program proposal, which it would extend the subway in northern direction to 125th Street. However, it's currently unclear how it's going to get funded, seeing that the MTA's requested budget is still $15 billion short of what the agency needs to fulfill their program. And with respect to the Second Avenue subway, the MTA currently assumes the availability of $507 million in federal New Start funding, but that has not been approved yet. So the question is, will the MTA go through with the second phase and then subsequently the third and fourth phases of the subway? And seeing that it has been in planning since 1929, I would say that history is being made right now with that decision. So thank you. Questions?
Let me just cover what's going on now. Okay, I just want to end up with what's going on now in terms of construction, and then we'll take questions. Construction was started on the section from 63rd Street to 96th Street in 2007. All of that construction work in terms of the tunneling and the boring has been completed, and they're working on the stations now. And that first phase of 4 phases of the Second Avenue subway is actually scheduled to open for operation in December 2016. So I used to say that in my lifetime I didn't expect that I was ever going to be able to ride the Second Avenue subway, but I will be able to ride at least a small piece of it. I wouldn't bet big money that in the next capital program, where, as Patricia said, there's a $15 billion shortfall on a $32 billion 5-year plan, that necessarily there will be money in the next program to extend it to 125th Street, but that's MTA's plan. And if it ever gets down all the way to Shelley Silver's district on the Lower East Side, I'm not going to be around by that time. So I can tell you that. So we'll take questions if you want. We have 5 or 10 minutes, and Patricia and I will try to answer them. I can do the history questions. As I said, she spent a good deal of the last 5 years writing her doctoral dissertation in part on the Second Avenue subway, so she knows a lot about what's going on now. Anybody? Yeah, the photographs, that's the route of the Second Avenue subway. You can see the whole plan is to go from Lower Manhattan all the way to Northern Manhattan and the Bronx, with a branch going across the existing 63rd Street line. That's the Second Avenue subway, the way it used to look. As I said, the Board of Transportation after World War II was talking about it. Everybody thought, well, this was the first stage of the independent system. One of the reasons for the independent system was to tear down the old L lines, so they started to tear down the line. The Second Avenue came down at 40 and 3rd Avenue in 1955. With the idea, this is Nelson Rockefeller and Governor Megan Lindsay, starting construction on the Second Avenue subway north of 96th Street in 1973, 1974. There was construction going on for a while, but as I said, it stopped in the 1970s north of 96th Street. It hasn't begun again there. MTA decided instead to actually build the first really working phase that's going to be open now of the 4 phases of the current plan from 63rd Street to 96th Street. These are old photographs from the 1970s. So, as you can see, big pieces of the subway are there. Whether it will ever be built is part of this trade-off that goes on continuously between fixing up the existing system and building new lines, a problem that's been here since the 1950s. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to just thank Dr. Derrick and Dr. Nobbe on their history of the Second Avenue subway.